In the previous video, we built our accounts controller, and in it, we also created this endpoint in which we are allowing the user to register themselves. And I said here, return bad request result errors if the user made any mistakes, like having a password that does not meet our password criteria, and so on. As you can see, I am returning a bad request, and I am returning an enumerable of identity error. If you remember, in the past, we made a parse bad request filter because we wanted to have our errors as an array of strings. Now we have to add the case that we may have that enumerable of identity error as a response. So here in our parse bad request, after this first if, I want to say else if, and I want to say bad request object result value is enumerable of identity error. I want to say errors so that this errors variable is this value here casted as enumerable of identity error. And now I can say for each error in errors, and then I will say response at error description, and with this we're creating an array of errors so that in the front end we can have it easy when iterating those errors. So we are good to go. Now let's go to our front end. In this video, we are going to work with a register form. Through this register form, our users will be able to register in our application. So this register component will send the user credentials into our web API and will receive the JSON web token so that our users are authenticated in our React application. So let's get to work. First, let me create a component that will contain the form. So let's come here to the Explorer, auth, right click, new file. I'll call it authform.tsx, and let me start working. Export default authform props authform props return parentheses, and we are missing function here. Okay, so now let me create this interface. This is a form just like any other form we have built in this course. So now I need model and a data type here, which is going to be user credentials. So let me go to our models file for auth here, and let me create that interface, export interface, user credentials, and we need email, a string, and password, also a string. Let me save. Let's come back here. Let me close this so we have more space. And let me import this. Let me come here, import this from models. And let me say on submit, which is a function with values, user credentials, and actions for mic helpers. And let me import that. Import from formic, semicolon here. And let me pass here user credentials, and let me say here, close this and void. Okay, so let's get to work on the UI of the component. Let me say here formic, let me close here, and let me say, as always, initial values model, and we should have props here. Then on submit equal to props on submit, then validation schema, and we're going to be using job. So let me import job. So import everything as job from job, semicolon here, and then here I will say dot object, and I will make the field email to be required. So a string required this field is required. And also email, because it has to be an email, you have to insert a valid email. And then let's do the same for password. So password, job, a string, and just required. This field is required. Alright, so we are done with the validations. Now let's build our form. So let me say here formic props, parentheses here, and let's put a form component. And here we're going to use a text field, which we created a few modules ago. So import text field from, and let me go to forms, text field, and in here I need to pass display name, which is going to be the email, and then field, which is email also. Let me clone that and do the same for password and password here. And also I want to add a new property, password, type password, so that we can have the text in the field encoded. So let me come here and let me come here and let me define the type, text or password. This will be the only two choices. And because I want to make this backward compatible, I want to make text the default choice. So let me say here text field dot default props equal to type text. Okay, and here in type I can add type equal to props type, and that's it. Now let me save. Let's come back here and let's continue working. Now, as always, let me have here a button, and let me import that, import button from utils button, semicolon here, and let me say here disabled formic props is submitting, type submit, send. And let me make also a link for a console link, so class name button secondary console, and let me put a to property here, and I will just redirect the user to our landing page. And we have an error here because we said on submit, not on submit. Okay, so that is done. We are done here. Now let me go to a register component which we're going to create. So right click here, new file, register.tsx, enter. Now let me say here export default function register, and here I will say return, and I will return a parenthesis, a fragment here, and in here I will have a 3 register, and then we're going to do the following. We are going to create a function here, async function register credentials, user credentials, and let me import that. Let me say try const response equal to await Axios, and let me import Axios post, and let me pass here a URL accounts slash create, and let me create URL accounts in our endpoints file. So let's come here, export const this equal to base URL accounts semicolon here, save. And now let me come back here and let me import this by hand, import this from endpoints semicolon here, and let me say catch here error. And now let's come back here, let me say semicolon here, and I need to add a data type for this response. So here in the post I can add that data type. So for that I have to go to auth models to create that data type. Interface authentication response. This response will contain the token, a string, and the expiration. So expiration date semicolon here. Now let me save, let me copy this, let's come here to the register component, let me paste that here, and let me import that. Let me put this in another line so that you can visualize everything. And now in this response we are going to have the token and the expiration time. For now, we're just going to console log that. Let me put this semicolon here. And then here in the error, as always, we're going to add a errors state variable. So set errors equal to use state, control dot to import that, a string array, and empty array as a default value. And here I will say set errors pass error response data, semicolon here. Now in here I will say display errors, and we're going to say here errors, and let me import this display error. So import this component from utils display errors, and this is great. Now after that I need to use my auth form component, and in here I will pass a model which will be email empty string and password empty string, and also on submit, which is going to be equal to async values await register, and we're going to pass the values. And that should be enough. Let me save. And just before we test this, we have to add this register component into our routes. So let me come to route config, and let's come here, and I will clone this line, and I will just work from here. I will say that the path is going to be register, and that we're going to use our register component. So register here. Now let me copy this, and let's come up, and let me say import register from auth register, semicolon here, and that's it here. But we forgot to add here in register, we actually forgot to pass the credentials into our post. So let me put here credentials, let me save, and let's go to Google Chrome, and here we have our application. Let me go to /register, and don't worry, we're going to have a link for that in the future. But for now, let me just say felipe@hotmail.com, and let me say here that I want to pass a simple password that shouldn't meet all of the password criteria. So as you can see, indeed we have that. Now before we make this next test, let me come here, because something that I need to do is here in the register I want to say set errors, and I want to pass an empty array. Save. Okay, now let's go back. Let me refresh. Let me make that test one more time, because I need to make sure that I am cleaning up. I just put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here. Send. Okay. So now let me put a real password. So I will modify this to say AA and an exclamation mark here. So let me copy that. Let me paste that here. Send. And it was sent, and we removed the errors, but seems like nothing is happening. But if we go to F12 and we have here object, you can see that here we are seeing this information, and in data we have expiration and token. This means that indeed we have our expiration time, which is 1 year from now, and our token. And besides that, if you are wondering why we are seeing so much information, it is because I have to come here, and instead of logging the whole response, I just have to log the data. Okay, but we already did this. What I want to do now is to go to SQL Server Management Studio just to make sure that our user is in the SQLnet users table. So let me say select top 1000 here. And as you can see, we have felipe@hotmail.com, which means that indeed we were able to create our user. Now let's work on the login component. In this video, we are going to build our login component. Through the login component, the user will be able to log in the application after he created his user account. Also, we are going to put the links for registering and logging in our application. So let's get started by working on the login component. So let's come here to auth, right click, new file, login tsx, enter. And now here I will say export default function login, and this will return this. And let me put here a fragment, then an h3 login. Then we're going to say here auth form, and we need to import that auth form. So import auth form from auth form, semicolon here. And now what I want to do is that I want to work on the functionality of this component. So let me say login here, credentials, user credentials, and let me import this. Let me import that. Let me say here try const response equal to await Axios control dot to import Axios post, and let me say here authentication response, and let me import that. Now let me say backtick here URL accounts, and let me import that from the endpoints file. So URL accounts from endpoints, and then let's say here slash login, and we're going to pass the user credentials, and let me put that in another line. Let me put that here, and this should be called credentials actually. Let me just copy this and paste it here because that is the name of the parameter. And then we're just going to say console log response data. Then we're going to say here catch error, and we are going to use an state variable for the error. So set errors, use a state, and let me say here string array, empty array by default. Then here we're going to say set errors, error response data, and then let's come down here and we're going to do the following. We're going to say first that we need the display error component, and we're going to pass errors. Then we're going to import these components. So import display errors from utils display errors, semicolon here, and that is fine. Now I need to pass a model to this, which will have email empty and password empty also. Then we're going to say on submit equal to async values await login values. Alright, so we should be good to go. Let me save and let's come back to our route config file because I need to create that route. So let me say here login, and now let's come up here. Let me clone this, and let me say here login and login here also. Alright, so we can save this, and now let's go to Google Chrome, and we're in register, but I want to go to login. So we have login here. Let me say felipe@hotmail.com, and let me put a password that is incorrect. So instead of this password, I will just paste this one, copy, paste, send, incorrect login. Okay, that's great. Now let me come here and let me copy this and paste that here, send, and it seems like nothing happened. But if we come here, you're going to see that we have expiration and token. This is because we still aren't doing anything with this information, but our login is working. Let me correct this right away before we work with our links of our login and register components. So here I want to say set errors empty like this, so that this gets cleaned up when we click on this send button that we have here. Okay, so that is done. Now finally what we want to do is to have the links of login and register here in this menu. So for that, let's go to the menu component. Let me go to menu. Let's come here. Let me minimize this so that we can see what we are doing. Let me say here I want to say div. I want to create a div, class name, div flex. Then we're going to say authorize. We're going to use our authorize component, and if the user is authorized, we have to display a hello message and things like that, but we're not really going to do that in this video. For now, we will just work with not authorized equal to, and here we're going to put another fragment, and we're going to say here link register. Then we're going to say here to register class name nav link button link, and let me put that in another line. And then we're going to clone this, and we're going to do the same for login. So login here and login here also. Let me save, and let's go to the app component because I need to log myself out by removing this claim that we have hard-coded here. Let me save, and let's go back to Chrome, and we're going to see that we have register and login, but I want these two links to be right here. So let's go back to the menu and work on that. Let me minimize this. So as you can see, what we have here is that we have this UL, which has this LI, but I made a mistake. This div, and let me expand it, this div should be outside of the UL. So let me put that here. And now let me collapse this UL and this div, and I want to put some style here. Let me say style, and I want to say display flex, and then justify content, and I will say a space between. Save, and now let's go back here, and now as you can see we have register and login. I can click on register and we are in register. I can click on login and we are in login. So we are good to go. Now that we have the token in the real application, I want to be able to extract the claims from that token and apply those claims in the application. Let's see that. We have the user's token in our application, but we are not using it. So let's do that now. I want to parse this token, get its claim, and be able to indicate to the React application that we are authenticated. So let me close this and let's go to Visual Studio Code. Let me close everything, close all, and let's get to work. I want to create a new file here in Auth. So right click here, new file, handle jwt-ts, and in here we're going to create the functionality for handling JSON Web Tokens. So let's say export function save token auth data authentication response. Let me write response correctly. Let me import this. So let me copy this from here and let's import this from models semicolon here. And now what I want to do is that I will use local storage to save the token. So let me write two keys here because I want to have the keys of local storage centralized in one place. So let me say here token key equal to token semicolon const expiration key equal to token expiration. Now let's come here and let me say local storage set item, and I will pass token key, comma, auth data dot token, and I will do the same for the expiration time. Storage set item, expiration key, comma, auth data, expiration to string. Alright, semicolon here. Now I want a method for getting the claims of the user. So let me say here export function get claims, and of course this will return a claim array. So let me import claim, and now let's come here and let's say const token equal to local storage dot get item. I am going to get the token from local storage, and I will use the key that I put here. So token key semicolon here. If there is no token, then we are just going to return an empty array. Otherwise, we are also going to try to get the expiration time of the token. So local storage get item expiration key semicolon here. Then we're going to say const expiration date equal to new date, and I will pass the expiration semicolon here. Then we're going to say if expiration date is less than or equal to the current date, then we're going to return an empty array, because this means that the token has expired. If the expiration date is before right now, it means that the token has already expired, and this is why I am returning nothing here. Now let's come here, and now I will try to parse the token, and I will get each of the claims in it. So const data token equal to JSON parse a top token dot split, and if you remember, a token is divided into 3 parts, and the middle part is the one with the claim. So this is why I will say here 1, because 1 represents the middle part of the token. So let me say here const response of type claim array equal to an empty array for const property in data token. I will iterate this object that will contain each of the claims, and I want to transform that into an array of claims. So push, and let me say here name property value data token property semicolon here, and now return response semicolon here. Then let's make a logout function. So logout, and a logout is just going to say local storage remove, and we're going to remove the token, so token key here, and also the expiration, so expiration key. And let me also do a logout here if the token has expired, because it is useless. Now what we want to do is to use these functions that we just created in our application. So let me go to login, and in here in this response I have the token. So what I want to do is to say here save token, control dot to import that, and I want to pass this response data that contains the token and the expiration. And I want to do the same in the register component. So let me go to register, and let's come here and let me paste this, and let me import that, save. And let's see that here we have an error. Here we have this error because it seems that getItem is returning a string or null. So let me say here this to cast it to a string, and now this is working. Let me save and we can continue. And now what I want to do is that now that we have these claims being saved here, I want to update the list of claims in our application. So for that I need to use a context, our authentication context. Remember that we have an authentication context through which we have the list of claims, but we also provide a function that will allow us to update the list of claims of the application. So we're going to use this authentication context here in our login and register component. Let me start with the login component. Let me say here const update equal to use context, control dot to import that, and authentication context, control dot to import that also. And in here after the save token I will say update, and I will pass this function handle JWT get claims that we have here, the invocation of that function of course. So let me import that, and in that way we are updating the claims in the whole application. Let me copy this and go to register because we need to repeat the exact same code. Let me import this and let me import this also, and let's go back to login and let me copy this and let me paste that here, and let me control dot get claims to import it also. Alright, so let's save. And now what I want to do is that I want to go to the menu component, because in here we have something to do. We have this authorized attribute here that is going to allow us to display something in the menu if the user is logged in. Instead of displaying register and login, I want to display something like a span, class name, nav link, hello, xxx. I will put here the email of the user in just a moment. Then after the span, I want to say button logout. So logout here. Let me put a class name here. Nav link, button link. And let me put here also on click, and here I want to say logout. And let me import logout from handle JWT. And I think we need to import button. So let me say import button from utils button semicolon here. And now this is working. So as I was saying, I need the email of the user so I can greet the user. So let's come here and let me use my authentication context for that. Let me say here that I need to say const update and claims. I will need these two values from our authentication context. So authentication context control dot to import that. And let me say here function get user email. This will return a string, and this will say return claims filter. This will be filter, and we're going to say x name equal email first value semicolon here. Alright, so I can use this get user email here. So I can say get user email, and this will be an expression. So let me put this in curly brackets like this. Now I need to use this update function here in this on click. So let me say here an anonymous function. So logout first and then update the list of claims to an empty array of claims. Now I can save, and let me just check before we make a test. Let's go to the app component and let's see that we don't have any claims. So let me just delete that comment, and this should be alright. Let me save and let's go to Google Chrome and let's get to work. Let me just refresh just in case. While in login, let me use my credentials to log in. So hotmail.com. Let me look for my super secret password and let me paste it here. Let me click on send, and as you can see, we have immediately hellofelipe@hotmail.com, which means that indeed I am logging in the application. If I refresh, you are going to see that we are not logging now. That is because I need to come to the app component and add some code that will get the claims when the application is loaded. So I need a use effect for that. So use effect, let me import that. Let me pass an anonymous function. Let me say here an empty dependency so that this use effect only runs once. Then let me say set claims, and I will say get claims, and let me import that get claims function. Now let me save. Let's come back here and I will refresh, and you can see that immediately I am logging as Felipe, which is great. Now the final thing we're missing is that after logging in, I want to be redirected back to another place. So let me say here const history use history, and let me control dot this, and I will say that I can delete this console log. After the update, I want to say history push, and I want to go to the root of our application. Let me do the same for the register component. So let me paste this here, console dot here to import this, and let me delete this console log, and let me also say history push slash here semicolon here. Let me save, and now let's come back here. Let me try to log in one more time. Let me refresh just in case. Let me again try to log in. Felipe hotmail.com, and now let me put my password here, send, and this is working. So now in our application we are able to know if we are logging or not. Now let's work on a rating system for our movies, but before that let me delete this authorized component instance that we have here because that was just a test. So let's come here. This was actually in the landing page, so let me go to the landing page and let me delete this authorized that we have here. So We are good to go. Let me remove also this reference here, and this is great, and we are ready to continue. In this video, we are going to work with a rating system through which we will be able to rate a movie. And I want the following. I want that a user is only able to vote once for a movie. A user cannot vote twice for a movie. The user can vote for as many movies as he wants, but he cannot vote twice for the same movie. Voting twice for a movie should update the rate and not create a new rate for the movie. So let's work on that. First, let's create a rating entity. So let's go to entities and let's create a new class, and I will call it rating, and I will have a few properties here like ID and also the rate itself, which is going to be range, and we are going to import this, and the number will go from 1 to 5, and then I will say movie ID, and then I am going to add a movie property, which is a navigational property. Also, I will add a string user ID. With the user ID, we are going to store the ID of the user that rated the movie. We are not going to allow anonymous users to rate movies, so we can definitely do this. And let me say here identity user control dot and bring this namespace, and then I will say here user. Through this identity user property, I can get more information about the user. Now, let's go to our application DB context to configure this table. Let's go here, and let's come down here, and I will say here DB set of rating, and I will say ratings. And then I will go to the package manager console, and I will say add migration, and I will say rating table, enter. And we have the migration. Now I will say update database, and that is done. Now we can work on a controller for our rating system. So let's go to controllers, add new class, and I will call it ratings controller, and I will inherit from controller base control dot to bring this namespace API controller route API ratings, and then I will inject the application DB context, and I will initialize it as a field, and now I will create a new endpoint, which is going to be an HTTP post through which the user will be able to rate a movie. So I will say here public async task action result post. I'll say from body, and here I will use rating DTO, and now I will create that rating DTO. So let's come here to DTOs and let's add a new class. I'll say rating DTO, and I need two pieces of data. The first one is going to be the rating, which is going to be range of 1 to 5, and also I want the movie ID, so movie ID, and that's it. Now let's come here and let's get to work. Let me control dot here to bring this namespace, and now first I need the user ID. If you remember, from the JWT we have access to the email of the user, so we're going to read the email of the user from the JWT that is supposed to come from the front end. So let's say here var email equal to HTTP context user claims, and I will say first or default, and I will say x type equal email value. Where does this email come from? From the accounts controller. Remember that here in the build token method we have new claim email, so I am retrieving that email from here. Now, in order to have access to the user information, we need to say here authorize, and let's control dot this, and I will say authentication schemes equal to JWT better defaults control dot to bring this namespace authentication scheme. I need to do this because if you remember, in the startup class we configure an authentication scheme of JWT better defaults authentication scheme. So let's come back here and let's continue working. Now we have the user's email, and now I want the user's ID. So for that I am going to inject here the user manager control dot to bring this namespace identity user, and I will say user manager control dot to initialize it as a field, and then here I will say var user equal to await user manager find by email async, and I will pass the email, and now I have the user here, and from there I can get the user ID. So I will say user ID. Now I have the user ID, which I'm going to use for registering the vote. Though before that, let me tell you something, and that is that here we're not receiving the email of the user nor the user ID. Why is that? Why do we have to use the user claims here? Why don't we just send the email from the front end? Because then the user, the front end, could send any information about his identity, but that is not fine because users can lie, but the JWT doesn't lie. Why not? Because remember that the JWT is constructed using the JWT key, which is secret for our application. So by extracting this information from the JSON Web Token, we can be sure that it is factually correct. So let's continue. Now let me say var current rate. What do I want to do now? I want to check on the ratings table to see if the user has already voted for the movie. So I will say x movie ID equal to rating DTO movie ID and x user ID equal to the user ID. And let's make this first of default async control dot to bring this namespace. And now we can say here if current rate is equal to null. If it is null, then it means that the user hasn't voted for the movie. So we can create a new record. We can say rating new rating, and we can control dot here. Now we'll say rating movie ID equal to rating DTO movie ID, rating rate equal to rating DTO rating, and rating user ID equal to user ID. And then I can say context at rating. Now let's say else, if the current rate exists, it means that the user has previously voted for the movie. So what we're going to do is that we're going to say current rate equal to rating DTO rating. So we are updating the rate field. Now let's come here and let's say await context save changes async, and then we're going to return no content. And we're almost done. Only one piece of configuration that we have to do before testing this, and it is that when the JWT comes with a email claim, then identity by default changes the value of the type of email to this value. Let's say claims type control dot, I will bring this namespace dot email. Do you see this value here, this really long expression? That is the value that is automatically mapped from email to that. But we don't want that because we're using email. So how can we turn that off? We can go to the startup class, we can go to the constructor of the startup class, and let's come here, and we're going to say JWT security token handler control dot to bring this namespace, and we're going to say default inbound claim type map. We're going to clear that map, and that's it. Now I can compile my application and everything is done. Now we can work on our front end. Now that we have the ratings logic in place, I want to come here to this movies controller because I need to add the user's vote and the average vote of the movie in the movie DTO. Let's come here, let's come down here to get int ID, and from here I want to return that data. So let's go to movie DTO and let me add two properties here, which are double average vote and also int user vote. So this is double because an average can be a number like 4.8 or something like that, but the user vote is just a number from 1 to 5 typically. So let's go to movies controller and let's work on this. So first I need to come here and say var average vote equal to 0.0 and var user vote equal to 0, and then here after the DTO I want to say DTO average vote equal to average vote, and then DTO user vote equal to user vote, semicolon here. And now in between those I will add some logic to populate that information. So first I want to say if I want to see if in the database, in the ratings table, there are records for the corresponding movie ID. I mean for this ID that we have here. So we're going to say here await context ratings any async, and I'm going to say movie ID equal to ID. So this is letting me know if there are any records in the ratings table that has the movie ID equal to this ID that we have here. If there aren't, then there is nothing we have to do. But if there are, then first we're going to calculate the average vote. So that is going to be equal to await context ratings, where I want to get all of the records that has the movie ID equal to our ID, and then I will say average async, because I want to go to the database and calculate the average of this number between all of the records. So okay, that is done. Now I want to get the user's vote. So how do I do that? Well, first I need to make sure that the user is authenticated. Otherwise, there is no reason for me to calculate this information. So let me say here http context.user.identity.is authenticated. This is the way I can get to know if the user is authenticated or not. But in order to use this information, I need to be under an authorized attribute, just like we saw in a previous video. But this endpoint should be accessible by anonymous users, because an anonymous user could be using our application and should be able to go to a page which is displaying the details of a movie. So how are we going to fix this? Well, one way is saying this. I want to say allow anonymous here, and then up here I want to say authorize and then authentication schemes JWT better defaults dot authentication scheme, and that's it. With this, now we have access to the information about the authentication state of the user from here. And let me copy this, because I need to come to the landing page and add the allow anonymous so that anonymous users can use that page. And not only that, but I need to do the same for our filter endpoint. Now let's go back here and let's continue working here. So we have is authenticated, and let's say that the user is indeed authenticated. Now I need to get the user's information. I can get his email, so http context user claims first of default, and then I want to say type equal to email dot value, then var user await user manager, and I need an instance of the user manager. So for that I can come to the constructor of our class so that we can use dependency injection. So user manager identity user manager control dot, and we want to initialize that as a field so that I can come here and I can say find by email async email semicolon here var user ID equal to user.id, and with this I have the ID of the user. And now what we're going to do is that we're going to make a query against our ratings table. So rating DB await context ratings first or default async, because I want to get a record that has the following characteristics: that has the movie ID field equal to ID, and also that has the user ID field equal to our user ID. If this isn't null, then it means that the user has voted for that movie before. And then we're going to say user vote equal to rating DB dot rate, semicolon here. Alright, so we are good to go here. Let me compile my application and let's continue. In this video, we are going to start working with a rating component here in our React application. So the idea is the following. We are here in the details of this movie, the Spider-Man Far From Home movie, and the idea is that I want to have a component in here that will allow me to rate this movie from 1 point to 5 points. So we will use a star system in order to indicate how we're going to rate this movie. So in order to have stars here, we need to use a service that has icons. One of them is Font Awesome. So we can come to this page, fontawesome.com, how to use on the web using with React, and don't worry, I will leave this URL as a resource of this video in the course. So here you can see that we have a few instructions on how to add Font Awesome in our application. So we're going to follow these instructions. Let me then copy this and let's come to Visual Studio Code and let me open a terminal, new terminal. Let me paste that here and let me save. That is done. Now let's come for the second one, copy this and paste that here, and that is also done. Now let's come here and let's copy this one, enter, and that is done also. So now I need to go to the index file, so let's go to the index.tsx because I need to import the icons that I want to use. So let me first say import library from Font Awesome SVG core, semicolon here, then import fa star from icons, semicolon here, and then I will say library add fa star. This will be a star, semicolon here, and we're ready to use the star icon in our application. So as I was saying, we're going to use a rating component. So for that, I will go to utils and I will right click here, new file, and I will say ratings.tsx, enter, and we're going to use this ratings component. So let me say export default function ratings, and we're going to receive some parameters. So ratings props return, and I will just return a fragment here, and let me create this interface. So interface rating props, and I want to have several values here. The first one is going to be maximum value. This regards to the maximum rating you can give in this ratings component. And the idea is that if I say 5, for example, then it means that we want to have 5 stars on a screen. So now let me say selected value, because it could be that the user has already rated that movie, and on change, because I want to react in the case that the user does the rating. This should be void, and instead of vote, I think rate should be better. So let me save, and now I want to have the following logic. I want to say here const maximum value r. I want to have an array that will have as many elements as this number is. So let me say here set maximum value r equal to use state control dot to import that number array and empty array by default, use effect control dot to import that empty anonymous function here, and I will pass as a dependency that maximum value, and then we're going to say here set maximum value r array props maximum value fill 0, and that's it here. Now with that I can do the following. I can use a map so that we can map this array into a collection of stars. So let me say maximum value r dot map value index, and we don't care about the value. So we're going to say here this font awesome icon, and let me close here, and let me import this. So import font awesome icon from React font awesome semicolon here, and I want to pass here a icon, a star, key, index, and class name, which is going to be an expression because we will do something interesting later, LG, and pointer. And I think I can make this like this so that we are sure that we're just ignoring that. Let me save here, and now let's go to our movie details component because I want to pass here our ratings component. So after this date, I want to say here Alt 1, 2, 4 in Windows, and here I will say your vote, and I want to use our ratings component here, and let me import that ratings component. So import ratings from Uriel's ratings, and now let's come back here, down here, and in here we're going to say maximum value, which is going to be 5. Selected value, for now we're just going to say 0, and then on change it's just going to be an empty function, so at least for now. So let me just say this like this. Now let me save, and let's come back to Google Chrome. Let's go to here, and let me refresh. And as you can see, we have 5 stars. Of course, this is not doing anything, so let's get to work on that.